So the abstract meeting we had this morning on emerging therapies and inflammatory bowel disease really covered a couple of topics. For one, there are two new exciting treatments that are potentially available in the future. One is a vaccine TNF kinoid, which works at immunizing the patient against TNF. So in a sense, this is the first vaccine trial looking at giving a medicine that potentially forms autoantibodies against TNF. The relevance of this, if approved, is that this may actually impact on future not only efficacy in Crohn's disease, but potentially this would be the first agent that we could give additional booster doses that avoids immunogenicity. So that was one important study. Another important aspect from the emerging IBD therapies was the ustekinumab data. This is looking at a novel pathway of IL-12/23, which is important in a group of patients with Crohn's disease who potentially did not respond or failed treatment with anti-TNF. And this is an agent that may have relevance in the future for Crohn's disease, not only in terms of efficacy, but a niche in terms of patients who failed anti-TNF therapy. There were a couple of studies looking at skin manifestations and problems related to treatment. One was presented by the French group evaluating squamous cell cancer and basal cell cancer, and we now know that Imuran and 6-MP seems to increase the rates of skin cancer for in countries and in states in the United States that have a lot of sun exposure. This may be a problem in patients with Crohn's on Imuran and 6-MP, and they should be followed regularly by a dermatologist. There were several studies looking at psoriasis and eczema that were related to treatment with anti-TNF, and this is an interesting phenomenon in that anti-TNF therapies are approved for psoriasis. However, we are starting to see psoriasis and eczema in some of these patients. This is a real problem for some of our patients. Some of them may respond to topical steroids or methotrexate, but some may have to stop the anti-TNF, and there were a series of studies on that. And then finally, I think there are two pivotal studies that are not on new treatments but are receiving a lot of attention at the Digestive Disease Week. One is the study looking at adalimumab for the treatment of ulcerative colitis, so Humira for the treatment of ulcerative colitis. The primary endpoint of clinical remission, secondary endpoint of clinical response, another secondary endpoint of mucosal healing, all of those endpoints were met with the treatment of adalimumab compared to placebo. So the conclusion from this study was that adalimumab was statistically better than placebo at treating ulcerative colitis. The question remains, though, that the percentage responses in this study were quite small. The placebo rates were quite small. So in the United States, the question remains whether the FDA will approve this, but this has been submitted to the FDA and may be a potential treatment in the future for ulcerative colitis. And then finally, a very important study looked at the treatment of inpatient ulcerative colitis failing 5 days of steroids, and this compared cyclosporin with infliximab. This is the first study to compare head-to-head cyclosporin and infliximab. Traditionally, we've known that cyclosporin works very well for inpatient ulcerative colitis. Infliximab in this study showed the same results. Infliximab worked as well as cyclosporin at efficacy, clinical response, and what was defined as treatment failure. So now in our armamentarium of medicines for inpatient treatment of ulcerative colitis, it does look that infliximab is as effective as cyclosporin.